I don't have a high degree of confidence in willpower or discipline. Whatever bullshit I happen to be obsessing about, like, it really doesn't matter. Just lower your standards. Lower your standards till you get started.
Need motivation?
Watch a top 10 with Believe Nation.
What's up, Believe Nation? It's Evan. This channel is designed to be a part of your daily success routine and help you believe in your Michael Jordan level talent. So let's get your motivation to a 10 and get you believing in you. Grab a snack and chill in today's lessons from a man who went from working in sales at a data storage company to becoming an entrepreneur, influencer, and writer of one of my favorite books of all time, The 4-Hour Workweek. He's Tim Ferriss, and here's my take on his Top 10 Rules of Success, Volume 4. Also, if you want to know what Tim and other successful entrepreneurs have to say about building unstoppable confidence, check out my 254 Confidence series, where every day for the next 254 days, I will send you a free morning video to help you build your confidence. The link is in the description below.
A lot of the anxiety that we feel is actually due to using words that are not defined very well. If you are trying to make high-level decisions, focus on time-consuming, high-priority projects,
Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Make your incentives compelling.
if you have some degree of intelligence or just slyness, you can always find a seemingly justifiable way to put off doing what it is you should be doing. And as a writer, I feel really qualified to say this because most writers I know will do anything to avoid writing. I mean, it's like, oh, the plant's dying. Well, I can't possibly sit down and work on my new chapter if my environment contains a dead plant. I really need to fix that dead plant. It's like, oh, my shoes are dirty. Well, I'm going to need to get my exercise later in the afternoon and they need to be ready so that I'm not distracted later. So let me put off writing. The writers will just do anything to get out of writing. And that's human nature. It's not because writers are bad people. It's not because, say, somebody listening is a bad person that they've maybe been a seminar junkie instead of going back to the notebook they filled up and actually putting next steps on their calendar. It's human nature. But for me right now, it's about the work and holding myself accountable, and maybe surprisingly to some people, I am not a huge, I don't have a high degree of confidence in willpower or discipline. I have a high degree.
It's surprising to hear that from someone like you.
I have a high degree of confidence in systems and accountability and loss aversion that creates the illusion of discipline and willpower, right? So you could take somebody, let's just say, who's always had trouble losing weight. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to take photographs of you, really unflattering, first thing in the morning after you've gone on a bender in your tidy whities in your kitchen. Now I own those photos. All right. I'm going to also take 5% of your income. And if you don't lose 20 pounds in the next 8 weeks and keep it off for 6 months, not only am I going to release those photographs onto the internet, post them on Facebook, everywhere your friends, family, colleagues will see them, I'm also going to donate 5% of your income to an anti-charity that you would rather nuke than give money to. And you will be on the public record as having given $5,000 to whatever it might be. You know, who knows, George W. Bush Presidential Library or the American Nazi Party. It doesn't really matter. And I'm not sure they're a charity, but regardless, you get the idea, to an organization that you would just be endlessly shamed to be associated with, unless you lose this weight. And I guarantee you with that why to, people will figure out the how to.
Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty powerful external motivator.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that intense, but I see no reason to, I see every reason to make your incentives compelling. And most people don't need more willpower or discipline. They need better incentives. So that's either a reward, or it's some type of punishment. And the punishment could be prepaying for, say, a certain number of training sessions with an athletic trainer that are non-recoupable, right? Maybe that's enough. For a lot of people, it is. Even if they make a lot of money, for some folks, the idea of losing a few $100
Right.
will drive them insane.
Yeah.
So they will actually show up. Or having someone like working out with a friend who's going to bust your balls, metaphorically speaking, gender neutral, whatever. If you don't show up to be their workout partner, maybe that's enough to shame you or guilt you into doing it. Great. Use it.
Rule number 2, break your thinking patterns.
What if I did the opposite for 48 hours? This is a question that I asked myself when I had my first job out of college. I was talking about suffering. My desk was in the fire exit. It was completely illegal. Slept under the desk, the whole 9 yards, and don't regret a minute of it. But I was a technical sales guy, outbound sales guy. So we had inside sales, outside sales. And my job was to close deals with CTOs and CEOs for multi-million-dollar data storage systems. At that point, storage area networks with fiber channel. And what I realized at one point was that all of the seasoned sales guys who were doing far better than I was doing were making phone calls between 9 and 5. Those were the office hours. And I said, well, I'm clearly not doing an effective job mimicking them. What if I did the opposite for 48 hours? It's a very recoverable experiment, right? If it doesn't work, then I can always go back to what I was doing. Doing the opposite meant making my calls between, let's just say, 6:30 and 8:30, and then 5:30 to 7:30. And it was just a hypothesis. Maybe I can get a hold of the people I need to get a hold of more effectively when the gatekeepers aren't there.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened.
Wow.
And I started booking more meetings and closing more deals than the majority of the guys in the company. And it was just from asking that question. What if I did the opposite for 48 hours? And you can apply that to many, many things. Right? Some of the others would be, well, this is one I asked in 2004. If I had a gun against my head and could only work 2 hours per week, what would I do? I know it's impossible. What would I do? And that type of ludicrous question was necessary to break my thinking patterns and stress test my own assumptions of what was possible. And you find that that is a learnable skill.
Rule number 3, get outside.
What would Tim tell his younger self if he could go back and change anything about the past or tweak it to make anything better? Is there anything that you would do?
I think that I would probably go back, not to necessarily my childhood, but go back to when I was really cramming and just working 24/7 prior to writing the 4-hour workweek after graduation. And I would mandate that I spend 30 minutes a day, like outside barefoot on the grass, just
during that time?
Yes. Just get outside barefoot, be grounded, get out of rubber soles, spend a little bit of time outside every day. I think that would have, I don't think that would have sacrificed anything, and it would have improved my mental well-being and I think just general quality of life.
Wow. Would you still be taking phone calls on the grass? It doesn't matter. Just at least on the grass.
Just get on the grass.
Doesn't matter.
I could have been
still
taking
be
phone
working
calls.
or whatever.
Or like, I mean, these days, for instance, in San Francisco, I'll batch. People who've read the 4-hour work week know that I like to batch similar tasks together whenever possible. And I will batch phone calls in such a way that I can go for a 1 to 3 hour walk through San Francisco.
Sure.
And
that's great.
You're making the phone calls. And if you don't need a visual reference in front of you, you might as well be walking outside, getting some exercise.
Exactly.
And I think walking is also very, very underrated. We've made a lot of evolutionary trade-offs to be able to walk extraordinarily long distances, even compared to other, say, grazing mammals. Like we can go for a very long time, and that's by evolutionary design, for lack of a better word. So I feel like we should exploit that and utilize it.
I like it. What is it? What do you feel when you get barefoot on the grass? What does that give you?
I think what it does for me, among other things, is there are people who talk about grounding and the effect of getting out of rubber soles. That I think is up for debate, the sort of scientific basis for that. But it helps me to feel grounded in a more perhaps metaphorical sense, and that is feeling connected to the earth, not disconnected as some type of robot who's been programmed to reply to emails. So just like getting outside and being like, you know what?
Nature.
am I allowed to curse?
Sure.
But it's just like, this whatever bullshit I happen to be obsessing about, like, it really doesn't matter. I mean, like a year or two from now, like if that guy who didn't reply to my email and I feel slighted,
Right.
probably, like, who knows, his grandmother probably died. Get over it. Get over yourself. Like, at the end of the day, it's so trivial. And and for whatever reason, being in nature and having that connection with the rest of the world and feeling not separate from it and cloistered in some type of office is medicine, has a medicinal effect for me.
Rule number 4, learn to say no.
There are many people who think, and I've certainly thought at different points in my life, if I just do X or achieve Y, these problems will all go away. And what you realize is, as you continue on this journey that is often meandering called life, you don't get rid of your problems if you achieve certain types of success. You just trade up. So maybe you had like, the Corolla of problems, then you trade up and you've got like the used Mercedes of problems, and you trade up and you have whatever, the Porsche of problems. The magnitude and complexity can become really challenging, and the opportunities become themselves problems, in the sense that and many people listening might say, oh, come on, give me a break. Like, this is such a a 1%er woe is me story, but it's not. And I'll tell you why, because, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. In the very, very, very beginning of your career, I do think yes as a default can be very helpful. But when I say the very, very beginning, I mean literally maybe 1 to 2 years out of college. If you go to college, you don't have to go to college, but let's just, from my personal experience, once you have even a vague glimmer of a notion of what you're really good at versus what you're bad at, and once you have a semi-decent group of friends and colleagues and coworkers, the birthday parties, the going out for drinks, the conferences that may or may not piss away 3-4 days of your life, these start to appear, and they are the siren song. Mm-hmm. In my experience, when I've encountered stagnation in my life or felt overwhelmed, for the most part, sometimes it's due to catastrophe and huge problems. But very often it's because I've overcommitted to the kind of sort of cool stuff. And then my calendar is so crowded. As Derek Sivers, who's one of my favorite entrepreneurs, would say, also just an incredible sort of philosopher king of programming and just eccentric guy in the best way possible. He would say that if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. To achieve the really big good things, you are going to have to let a lot of small, recoverable bad things happen.
Rule number 5, lower your standards.
When I spoke to, say, Paulo Coelho, who's sold 100 million plus copies, The Alchemist, etc., you talk to Rick Rubin. So let me give his example first. When he has a musician who's stuck, great musician, but they've developed performance anxiety about songwriting for whatever reason, he will say, do you think you could get me one sentence or maybe 2 words that you like by tomorrow? That's it, 2 words. Can you do that for me? And he gives them a micro assignment. Best writing advice that I probably ever received, and I've received a lot of good writing advice, but I can get myself really wound up because I expect perfection to flow from my fingertips like magic, and that never happens. So then I beat the hell out of myself, and that makes me less likely to put pen to paper in the first place. I'll procrastinate, which is why if you write 2 crappy pages per day, you've won the day. That's a successful writing day. And that does a few things. It helps you to maintain enthusiasm because you're constantly winning. And of course, on many days, you'll write more than 2. You'll get to 2, then you go to 5 or to 10. But if you're on an off day, you write 2 crappy pages, even if you never use it, it's a successful day. And that, I think, for longer term projects and extended creativity is really important. But the story that this writer told me with that tip, he said, okay, this is where this comes from. Did you know that IBM, when it was the 800-pound gorilla, it was an undefeatable sales force? Do you know what one of their rules was? He's like, no. He says, well, what do you think their quotas were? And I was like, well, I'm sure their quotas were really high because they wanted to motivate their guys to get after it. And he goes, no, their quotas were the lowest in the industry.
Wow.
And the rationale was, we don't want our salespeople to be intimidated to pick up the phone. We want them to feel like they're going to pass their quota quickly, which they did, and then they shot well past it and clobbered the competition. So the counterintuitive pairing of low expectations leading to higher performance is really odd. I think it's also very context and role specific. But if we're talking about creativity in particular, right? So not necessarily work output, the approach, there are a number of prolific writers who have said, Neil Strauss said this, there's no such thing as writer's block, which drives me crazy. Because I'm like, come on, like, you might be a mutant like X-Men of writing, but for the normal humans, come on, like, give me a break. And he goes, no, hear me out. Number one, he is a trained journalist, and journalists tend to have writing block beaten out of them because their boss is like, oh, you can't find the right prose for your 500-word article? Oh, get it in by 5 o'clock, asshole. You know? And they're just like, oh, wait, this isn't school? And they're like, yeah, deadline. That's your incentive. Writer's block my ass. And he's like, oh, okay. But he said, and what they learn is, he said, there's no such thing as writer's block. He said, what that is performance anxiety that you've imposed on yourself because your expectations are too high. And he's like, just lower your standards. Lower your standards till you get started.
Rule number 6, practice stoicism.
Stoicism, I think, is one of the best operating systems for thriving in high stress environments. In effect, the more you schedule and practice suffering, the less unplanned suffering will disrupt your life. And so Stoicism, if we go back to, say, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, is really very similar to Zen in many, many ways, but it is a practical set of beliefs, frameworks, and exercises that allow you to inoculate yourself against fear of the unknown, fear of worst-case scenarios, to become less emotionally reactive, which is why Stoicism. I mean, certainly you can look at George Washington. Thomas Jefferson had Seneca on his bedside table. I think Bill Clinton reads Meditations by Marcus Aurelius every year. But if you want to look at some additional contemporary examples, it's become hugely popular in Silicon Valley. It's become hugely popular in the NFL, including the Super Bowl winners, past 2 Super Bowls, because it teaches you how to view obstacles as opportunities and how to become less emotionally reactive. So you're effectively putting the Serenity Prayer into practice, where you are learning to separate the things you can control from the things you cannot control, and to only focus on the former, and to develop the courage and the ability to act.
Rule number 7, keep things simple.
Many things that involve some discomfort or pain can be productive, right? But not all things that are painful
Are productive.
lead to anything productive, right? And you can just become a masochist without realizing it. And that's what happened to me. And I also felt like I could grasp complexity and juggle a lot more effectively than other people. So I was drawn to complexity because I felt I could win there. I felt like there was a high barrier to entry, and that gave me a competitive advantage. Then at some point, especially in the last year, I realized I'm just fighting an empty jacket here. Like, who's my competitor? This is ridiculous. Like, I'm actually just fighting myself. And what might this look like if it were easy? And it started as a journaling exercise, which is one of the most common patterns in all the interviews I've done in Tribe of Mentors and Tools of Titans and the podcast. Journaling, meditation, and journaling are kind of the two partners in a sense. They work together really well, that recur over and over again. And so I was journaling one morning on what might this look like if it were easy. Well, I've done it for many, many different things.
With respect to this book specifically, you mean?
I did it for the podcast when I started the podcast. I had to ensure that there was next to no editing. Right. I would do it with my friends in the beginning to make it less intimidating. I would allow wine, which didn't always turn out very well. It actually really ended poorly in the first episode in particular. But
if that's what you needed to do,
that's what I need to do just to like get the lawnmower started. I needed to grease the skids and make it as easy as possible. And you can always complicate it later, but if you start with the complex, the likelihood of quitting or abandoning it very quickly is high.
Rule number 8, have a strong why.
What is the driver? What's that thing that makes you be so willing to suffer?
It's the promise of that crack hit for me, which is the aha moment.
In you or in you and other people?
So it's both. And the reason that I get such a high from it is if I can crack the code in the sense that I find something that saves people hundreds of hours, or myself hundreds of hours in the learning curve for a particular skill or a particular type of recovery, or fill in the blank, just an elegant or non-obvious solution to a long-standing problem, I'm like, oh, okay. I can't wait to see how people are going to respond when I provide that to 1,000 people and I see for most of them, the vast majority just go, holy f***. Like if you take someone, for instance, I didn't learn to swim until I was in my 30s. I think we may have talked about this. I grew up on Long Island, but I was deathly afraid of drowning because I had some near drowning incidents and some lung issues. And now at this point, I was taught by this gentleman named Terry Laughlin, something called total immersion, which I first learned from a book, which I was introduced to by Chris Sacca, who's a billionaire investor in this book, oddly enough. But you can take someone, which I did with Terry at one point for the Tim Ferriss experiment, the first TV show I did. This mother of 2, I think, Sarah, who had never been able to swim, couldn't even put her head underwater in the pool comfortably. And 4 days later, open water swimming 500 meters in the ocean in like 40-foot deep water, freestyle. And when you show someone that an impossible like that is not only possible, but that they can crack it really quickly, that's my drug of choice. I just get such a high out of it.
Rule number 9, put things in perspective.
A lot of folks look at me and some people assume that I'm a risk taker. Oh, he loves risk. He loves taking no risk, no reward and all this. I am so focused on risk mitigation at all times.
Me too.
You know, and
me too.
And because
look what I did in the height of everything when we were living it, I decided to build a client service business. No, really.
No, I get it. But I think that's in part because you and I have had so much practice capping the downside and like walking through that rehearsal. Like, all right, can I actually stomach and handle the worst case scenario? If so, all right, I'll cap my downside, and then eventually the upside will take care of itself. And you know, like you shared in Tribe Mentors, this is another one I think about a lot, which is when you feel overwhelmed or unfocused, you know, what do you think? What do you do, or what do you think about? And your answer was, you know, if you're going through something very difficult, you imagine your family dying in a terrible accident, and it puts it in perspective. It's like there are problems that we put in quotation marks and we make a big deal out of on a day-to-day basis, and then there are tragedies and crises and real dark things
stuff
that can happen. And when you put it in perspective, you're like, oh yeah, like whatever, getting my coffee
Lost
20 minutes late and it's cold, maybe not a big deal. Like maybe that should not occupy any of my mind.
Lost a huge account.
Yeah,
lots
lost
of
a huge
millions
account.
of dollars.
Yeah. And you know, one thing that came up again and again when I was talking to these various mentors in different fields is the idea that sometimes you need life to save you from what you want, to give you what you need. So sometimes losing that account, you look back 5 years later and you're like, best thing that ever happened.
The best.
And rule number 10, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is try TM.
I want to hear your response to one of the questions that you sent all of us.
Let's do it.
So, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? So, for everybody watching, when you get this book, this is one of the questions that many of us, quote unquote, mentors have answered.
Yeah. I would say for me, it is a consistent morning practice before taking my phone off of airplane mode of sitting and doing a meditative practice for, say, 20 minutes. And it's stuck initially by taking a transcendental meditation class of perhaps 3 days when I was going through a very, very difficult time. And Chase Jarvis, who's awesome and a hugely successful commercial photographer, he's worked at every big brand you can imagine and is also a very good CEO. Both he and Rick Rubin is like the most legendary music producer of all time. Just look at his discography. It's insane. It's like Johnny Cash, Eminem, Jay-Z, Metallica. The list is absurd. It's like everybody you've ever heard of. And he also said to me at one point, because I was going through a really rough time and I was very tightly wound, he said, have you ever considered TM? And I'm like, mantra? Like you pay them to give you a mantra? It's a cult. Like I don't want to be part of a cult. And on and on and on and on and on and on. They're like, no, it's actually really secular. And I know there's like a little bit of weird stuff, but you can just ignore that. It's like the first hour of the talk. Just ignore it. What do you have to lose? And I was going through such a difficult period at one point. I was like, that's a good point. So I did it, and that kickstarted the meditation. And then I experimented with other things like Headspace, which I have no vested interest in. So you start with 10 minutes a day for 10 days as a proof of concept. And the way I'd encourage people to think about meditation, because it can sound very woo-woo, and I certainly was repelled by it for a long time, is you are sitting down, say on a couch, to practice observing your thoughts and feelings and emotions for a very short period of time so that for the rest of the day, you are less emotionally reactive. What this means is you are rehearsing, you are training. It's like going to the gym. So let's say you're training for a sport. All right. So you're an athlete in X. You go to the gym to do squats, to do this, this, and this, so that when you get on the playing field, you can perform better. It is exactly the same. You're rehearsing and training for your day. And then when you run into something that normally would trigger you, whether that's a certain type of email, whether that's an employee who has a habit that drives you insane, or you being behind in your schedule and then the line at Starbucks is longer than you would like, whatever it happens to be, the things that would normally cause you to get really tightly wound or explode or berate yourself or other people, you will then start to spot before you have the reaction. And then you say, okay, half a second of breathing, let me choose my response instead of being held hostage to these loops and triggers that we all have. Yeah. So that has been enormously, enormously helpful for me.
Now I've got a really special bonus clip from Tim on how to not retreat into story that I think you're going to really enjoy. But before that, it's time for the 3-point landing questions. Time to move from just watching another video to actually taking some kind of action in your life and your business. So answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what is your strong why? Number 2, what do you need to start saying no to? And number 3, how can you regularly get outside each week?
So there's a phrase, let me use that I repeat to myself a lot. And in the last 2-3 years in particular. And the phrase is, don't retreat into story. So there are certain stories we all have that we tell ourselves. And some of the stories are very, very old, right? Like, I am X. I can never Y. Oh, I always blah, whatever it is. Like, this is going to be painful, or I always up, whatever. There's these stories, as short as they might be, as poorly as they might sell as a children's book, they're these short stories that we all have. And I've really tried in the last year and a half or 2, and meditation does help a lot with this, to whether you use an app like Headspace or guided meditation from some, say, Tara Brach or Sam Harris or whatever, or just TM or some type of seated meditation, to tell myself, and I'll put this at the top of my journal in the morning if I'm using something like the 5-minute journal, in all caps at the top is, don't retreat into story. Don't retreat into story. I might even, if I'm feeling myself starting to tailspin into some old pattern, I will go into my journal. I've never talked about this. And since I know I'll be using the journal each morning, I will put one of 2 things at the very top of each journal entry for the next, say, 15 days before I can forget or procrastinate or not do it. One is don't retreat into story. The other one, which is very closely related, is actually from Tony Robbins, who I've gotten to know in the last couple of years, who impresses me the more I get to know him, which is saying a lot because he's freaking Tony Robbins. Yeah. Anyway, and that is state and then an arrow to the right, story, then an arrow to the right, strategy. This is really important. So state leads to story, leads to strategy, because what I've noticed for myself is that if I wake up and I'm just in a funk, didn't get enough sleep, or I'm just maybe feeling the early symptoms of maybe going into a funk for whatever reason, there are many things that can trigger it. What I'll sometimes make the mistake of doing is sitting down and immediately trying to problem solve in a depressed, energetic or emotional state. And what Tony has explained to me is if you do that, the lens that you're going to wear is only going to allow you to see the problems and the negative. So you're going to sit down, you're going to try to form a strategy from the outset, but you're going to have a negative state, a disabling story that you're telling yourself, and the strategy is going to be terrible.
Yeah, you're trying to solve the problem with the mindset that created the problem to begin with. Right.
And instead, the state, story, strategy leads me to, that's one of the things, and not many things can get me to do this. So I'm very much an evening exercise guy, but that has encouraged me to, once again, go in the calendar and pre-book exercise with trainers. This is going to sound bad, but I don't need trainers. I've never really had trainers. For what I do. It's the accountability. So I will book myself for things that I would normally never do, like one-on-one Pilates classes. Oh my God, puke, right? Like, which actually done well technically is pretty goddamn hard. It's like GST, the gymnastic strength training, in a lot of respects. But nonetheless, let me not defend my Pilates habit right now. But I will say pre-book Pilates or acro yoga or some type of Olympic weightlifting in the mornings, at least say 3 days a week, and I'll book it out 4 weeks in advance, and I'll prepay, schedule everybody, and I know they are showing up, right? For me, mornings like 10 a.m., which I know is laughable to people, but to make sure that I am up and ready, which means I will have to wake up probably at least 9, which is an accomplishment for me. Historically gone to bed like 3, 4, 5 a.m.
Wow.
Which does not help manage manic depression, by the way. And, but I'll get it on the calendar, and that will set my state. Then I will have an enabling story, and then I'll set the strategies. It's a very long-winded way of explaining why I use 2 prompts at the top of my journal, and I'll pre-fill them very honestly. Number 1, don't retreat into story. Number 2, state, arrow, story, arrow, strategy.
Raise your standard.
Apple at the core, its core value is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better.
Not one drop of my self-worth depends on your acceptance of me.
If you want to learn more about Tim and his latest book, The Tribe of Mentors, check out the video we did on it. The link is right next to me. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
Much like asking yourself, what makes me happy, is not really a great question. It's too broad, right? It takes too long to search.